Right, let's jump on to the Surfaces tab. So I'm on my Forest Pro object and I have Generate selected, and I'm going to select this surface. And I'm going to click yes, right click, and go into my Forest Pro object. I'm going to name this Surfaces. Okay, and now we're straight into our Surfaces tab. So straight away, when I've generated one, you can see that it's been added to the surfaces. You can add in more by hitting this plus button, similar to the other ones. But another thing you need to see here is this auto and refresh button. And when you're working with Forest Pro, basically you might be working with large surfaces and you want to be able to update them as you're doing it, but it can be quite cumbersome on your scene if it's constantly updating. So by default, Forest Pro has this off. For this instance, I like to switch it on, and most cases I do switch it on unless it's slowing down my scene. Now we're going to add some objects. So if I go to geometry, we've done this before. Again, it's a plus button and we add in our geometry. So I'll add in a few of these objects and you see they're scattering on that surface. Go back to my surfaces tab. And then there's also another thing you can do, which is get from forest, and you can use a different forest object to define your surfaces, and you just use that forest object as your surfaces. So over here, I've created a masters one, and in here, I've selected 3 surfaces. So I can select the surfaces and say define these surfaces by that other Forest Pro object. So if I select here, you'll see these objects are now being used as a surface based on this object, the Forest Pro object. So you'll notice that it's now grayed out and you cannot add any more. So the only way to add other surfaces is to go back to this masters file and add them in here. So I can add here, I can add here, but you cannot change. This is just for adding surfaces. You can't change the areas, geometry, stuff like that, and transforms. You have to do that in the other Forest Pro object. Okay, so just be aware of that. I'm going to clear this and I'm going to keep that surface there, and then we're going to move on to the modes. So there's XY mode and there's UV mode. Now in here I have 3 separate surfaces. Now if I go back to my Forest Pro object and I add those in like so, you'll see that they're stacked on top of each other and it works fine. The only issue is they're exactly the same. You'll see that this bottom level has the same as this and this level. Now in XY mode, if I hit randomize stacked, you'll notice that now changes it. So now we have slightly different versions up and down. Now that only works if your surfaces are separate. Okay, so if I select this object again, I'm going to remove all these. And over here I have a surface which is the same as these, but they're one object. So if I add this, you'll notice only the top one has been added and the XY and random stacked isn't working. This is where you can use UV. So if I select my UVs, it's going to use the UVs to scatter. Now we have the same issue where it's identical here, here, and here. So how do we change in the UVs? Well, we change the UVs on the objects themselves. So if I select this object, I can then go into unwrap UVW, open it up, and I can select all these and I can move it. So you can see it a bit better. So as I move these, you'll see that they change. I can select these and I can move these. So changing your UVs will then change the way they're shown. So I'm going to X that and go back to my Forest Pro object. So that's how you can do UVs, and also you can change the UV transforms, much like a texture, by checking these, and you can stretch and scratch the UV, or you can double it to 2 and 2, and you get different results. I'm going to uncheck that now. The next one I wanted to show you, and I'll create a new Forest Pro object. I'll click this globe, go into my modify panel. In geometry, I'm going to add in this cylinder. Now you'll notice that if I go to surfaces, we're in XY and they only start at this point, and that's because in the XY coordinates it can only go to the total surface area here. You can't go negative below. Again, you can change the UV and it will go all over, but there's a bit of a problem here. What if you want these surfaces to go out away from the surface along its normals? Well, you can see here direction. So I can go to XY if I want, and I can change this to normal. So I can hit 0 here, and then these will protrude outwards on their normal direction. UV, again, will do it on all the surfaces. Now, if you don't know what normals are, if I click this object, I'll show you, and I go to polygon, you can click show normals here, and this is the normals. Basically tells 3ds Max which is the front face and which is the back face. So you'll notice that all these are pointing outwards, and that's how it distinguishes this forest pro object. So I'll go back to this forest pro object, and the last thing we'll be talking about is the altitude range and the slope range. So that's where I have this surface. So if I create another forest pro object, click here, go yes, right click. Again, same things, you go to geometry, and we're going to add just one of these. Let's do the cylinders as well. So again, we have this sloped. Now, imagine these are trees pointing up. You kind of do want these pointing along the surface because they might angle and stuff like that. So if I go to my surfaces, you want that up. You can do normal, but it wouldn't really make sense for trees. But what also wouldn't make sense are trees growing on this extreme slope. So you can define the range here. So I can bring this down. It's like, oh, the top ones I don't want growing up there because there's less oxygen, there's less plant life, so the trees won't grow up that high. You could then do a slope range, which tells it, well, at a certain slope, I don't want you to grow certain trees because they just wouldn't happen in a natural environment. So you can go, okay, I need to lower this 90 degrees down, and then here they won't grow on this extreme steep slope. And that's pretty much the surfaces tab. Again, you can add surfaces, you can tell it which direction to go on the UV or the XY, you can change the direction, and then you can do altitude range and slope range. And that's everything you need to know on the surfaces tab.